Elliotte Friedman said,
I think Winnipeg knows that it's going to have to listen on some of their key players, Hellebuck, Scheifele, Dubois, who have 1 year remaining. But what I think the Jets have made very clear is this is not going to be a rebuild. They are not tearing it down, and they are not starting over again. Obviously, there could be some futures as part of these trades if it happens, but they've got a lot of good players on term contracts, and they want to support them. So they're looking for players, if they make these deals, that can help right away, not just futures. This won't be a rebuild.
Clearly, the Winnipeg Jets are listening to offers on Hellebuck, on Scheifele, and Dubois. That shouldn't be a surprise to anyone. But he was very adamant that the Jets made it very clear that this is not a rebuild. You don't often hear teams so clearly try and make sure that if they're giving out information that that part of it as well is. I mean, I kind of chuckle because, I think it really is semantics in a lot of ways as to what your definition of rebuild is. I think there's enough talent on this team that, unless they traded literally half of their top 12 players, you're not going to have a team that isn't talented enough to win some games, especially in the Central Division. We realize that there's a possibility that their top two centers are being traded and a Vezina winning goaltender, which to me is the biggest piece in all of this, because if you don't have Connor Hellebuck, there's probably knocking a few wins off that total regardless. How would you describe what you think the team is going to try to do with these deals that they're being forced into make on one side of things with potentially a Hellebuck and Dubois, and the deals that they feel that they need to make and want to make when it comes to guys that have been here for a long time, like Mark Scheifele and Blake Wheeler, if there's a taker?
Yeah, I'll start off by saying, we're hearing a lot of that coming into play from insiders about, the Jets, reinforcing the Jets' feeling of not wanting to have a rebuild, right? And we got that, from Darren Dreger like a month ago or 2 months ago, whatever it was, kind of in and around when the offseason first started. And there was a lot of questions around the futures of these four players. And so I think there can be two ways to look at that. You can look at, from a franchise perspective, because we know the leverage is flipped to the players a lot more nowadays, in particular here in Winnipeg. So what does that mean? Does that messaging that we're hearing, does that mean the Jets are really truly don't want to rebuild, that they want to find a way to retool or whatever to be competitive, to be a playoff team? Because right now I don't think you can argue that they're a contender, even if they kept everybody, obviously. And that's their true goal, and they're going to do their best to hold on to some players potentially, or re-sign some players. Or is it a result of, okay, we're concerned about what the fan base might think. We want to cover all bases of outrage from the fan base, where it's like, okay, all those fans that are now, it coincides perfectly with their, it obviously coincides perfectly with their season ticket, campaign and run, right? Is buy tickets. This is the future is bright, and we're going into a heavy rebuild. Do those coincide for success? Probably not. So I think as you could also look at as like, this is the messaging we're sending out, but we might be forced into a rebuild. So when we do, if we do get to that point, well, then now we need to tell people we did our best, to retool, and now we're going to deal with it. Because I think there is a little bit of fear, not just from the Jets organization, but from any organization, on what the reaction would be from the fan base, over a total rebuild. And I think they might be pleasantly surprised that there might be more people who are interested in this city of a rebuild, of seeing, a younger team, of seeing a team of, that tries harder than we've seen the Jets try over the last few years, even if the results aren't as strong. But as far as what I think is going to happen, or what I've been hearing, or, where this has kind of been trending, I think we're in a really weird situation with the Winnipeg Jets. And that I think there is potential that, of the four guys, maybe one is just gone. We're hearing a lot about the idea that all four could be gone, and I've certainly been in that camp, and I think that would probably be an ideal situation. Understanding that what you're getting in return is fulfilling your end goal of wanting to retool, right? Because you can't retool with a bunch of draft picks, right? That's just not the way it works. And so maybe I'm getting the feeling the Jets aren't getting what they hope to get, or or want to get from teams. I think I think there's not a lot of trade teams out there. I think there's an interest to sign a Mark Scheifele a little bit longer maybe than was expected or whatever. I know a lot of people, want to maybe see him move. I think he could benefit from a different place. I don't think there's a lot of people that want to sign Mark Scheifele to a very, very long contract, right? So I think the Jets are fielding some of the information they're getting, and I think they're under, whereas some people might look at the Jets' first round series against the Vegas Golden Knights and say, this team does not have what it takes. It doesn't have the characteristics of being an NHL contender. It doesn't have a team where everyone on there, like the Vegas Golden Knights, understands, respects, and appreciates their role. They're looking at a team that they lost to in 5 games, deserved a better fate from, and now they're probably going to win the Stanley Cup. And then you look over the other hallway in the NHL Finals, and you see the Florida Panthers. Fans might look at the Florida Panthers and go, look at Paul Maurice. He managed to take a new batch of players in one season and turn them into a Stanley Cup finalist at the very least, right? And that, it's the players' fault. And we all know Maurice has ownership of the Jets' downfall. There's absolutely no doubt about it. Paul Maurice is not the answer in Winnipeg and wasn't the answer in Winnipeg probably for the last couple of years he was here. But they look at a team that goes, instead of looking at the players as being possibly the issue and maybe not the coach, they look at a team in the Florida Panthers and they go, they squeezed into the playoffs as the 8th seed, and look what they were able to do. Look what they were able to do, right? So where do we fall in that mix?
Here's the thing, though, and it's great to think that way, but I mean,
oh, it's horrible to think that way. It's not great to think that way. It's blind to think that way.
Like, hey, that you've got a chance to win for sure. With those guys. Here's the thing. Scheifele's got 1 year, Dubois got 1 year, Hellebuck's got 1 year, and if you don't do it now, you know what the conversations on this program and in every article in your paper and around it's going to be, when's the shoe going to drop? Are we waiting to the trade deadline to do that? What does that do to the team all season long? I mean, at a certain point, some of this stuff, unless they come out with extensions for these guys, which I don't think is going to happen.
That's where it gets sticky. I think they, and maybe they could learn from the Calgary Flames because, you listen to Craig Conroy and what he's done in his, in his press conference after being hired as the GM. I mean, he was obviously a very integral part, or at least a piece of that executive team that was listening to the Johnny Gaudreaus, that was listening to the Matthew Tkachuk's. And I think there's a lot to learn from that. Craig Conroy said he has learned from what, he was under the impression that Johnny Gaudreau was coming back to the Calgary Flames. And so I think what happens in these situations is a lot of the times there's verbal agreements among players that if you run it back, we will be interested in signing an extension. And so I'm not suggesting that's necessarily what's happening with the Winnipeg Jets, but when time plays out here, I think we're going to get a lot of, not necessarily concrete answers, but we're getting a better idea of the interest in holding on to players and hoping that you can do damage next season with the same group, the same leadership group, and somehow change their opinions. I hope that's not the case, Huss, but as time passes here, and from what I've been hearing, I'm falling more into the group of the people who feel the Jets are going to be doing their best to run it back. And I think the only guy that might actually be gone, and this might blow your mind, might be a Connor Hellebuck. Because I think that there are teams out there that will give you, that will give you. It's not what I'm advocating for, Huss. It's not what I'm advocating for. I'm just saying there might be more suitors and there might be a better return to accomplish your goal of retooling rather than rebuilding. And I know that sounds ridiculous because I've been on here and others have been on here saying that if you don't have Connor Hellebuck, you can retool. You can't. It's an ultimate rebuild. But I don't think the Jets are viewing it that way. I think they're viewing to get more physical. Like, I'm not saying you keep exactly who you have. I just don't know if it's centered around the 4 players we've been talking all offseason about. They certainly need to get bigger and better and stronger on the blue line. But I don't think they're adverse to finding a 1B goaltending tandem that costs them $6 million in total. They could go to Vegas right now and take that. Like you can get a Laurent. I'm not advocating for that. I'm just saying this is what I think are potential options if we are led to believe that the Jets want to rebuild or retool and not rebuild.
Well, as I say, that's just kicking the can down the road again until the last possible minute. I don't think that does the team any justice, and I certainly don't think that goes over well with the fan base.